You know, the excuses leftists make for jihadists really blows my mind sometimes. Leftists have become ardent apologists for Islamo-Fascism, and their ideas on this subject are as inaccurate as they are disturbing. As I mentioned in my last video, the left has a strong, almost religious ideological underpinning. That is, that the West is always wrong, and anyone who opposes the West is righteous. But even liberals realize that outright support of theocratic Islamic states or one-party dictatorships doesn't pass the laugh test. And so, they've gone back to their orthodox Marxist theology to explain the phenomenon of international terrorism. Through a Marxist lens, the world is divided into rich and poor, owner and worker, exploiter and exploited. Therefore, if a person or a nation is poor, it is always due to the oppression of the richer person or the richer nation. This simplistic view of the world is the main reason for leftist support of Palestinian terrorism. Israel is perceived to be Western and rich, while the Arabs are perceived to be poor and downtrodden. Therefore, the Arabs are right. Never mind that the Palestinian Arabs treat women like property, use intimidation and violence against religious minorities, openly call for the rule of Sharia religious law, severely persecute gays, and generally conduct themselves in a way that liberals would find abhorrent if it were being done in their backyard. The Palestinians are poor. Therefore, they are justified in anything they do, including murder of children. And so, 9/11 and other terrorist attacks are portrayed as a case of the downtrodden of the world striking back at the biggest, richest, capitalist exploiter of them all, the United States. It seems a reasonable hypothesis. I'm sure poorer countries do look at the U.S. with envy. But why is it that only the Muslim countries have produced people who have shown repeatedly that they're willing to kill themselves just for the chance to kill American civilians? While some Muslim countries are quite poor compared to the US or Western Europe, they are not the poorest countries on earth. The poorest countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. Their skin is black and they are mostly Christians and traditional tribal religionists. The 5 poorest countries on earth are Burundi, the Congo, Ethiopia, Malawi, and Liberia. For example, the GDP per capita in the Congo is $123. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, which produced most of the 9/11 hijackers, has a GDP per capita of $13,399. In other words, they have more than 10 times the wealth per person as the Congo. So when was the last time you heard about a radicalized man from the Congo hijacking an airliner? Why aren't impoverished black Africans infiltrating the West, former sleeping cells, and blowing up buses to punish us for our decadent capitalism? And furthermore, the majority of committed al-Qaeda terrorists are upper middle class to wealthy. Osama bin Laden himself was heir to a construction fortune worth billions of dollars. His second-in-command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is a physician. Mohammed Atta, the leader of the 9/11 hijackers, was the son of a lawyer and a wealthy heiress in Cairo, Egypt. While planning the attack, he was earning his graduate degree in Germany. Now, how many poor Americans would kill to study abroad in Europe? I'm sorry, poor choice of words. But no, terrorists are not poor, and they are not motivated by poverty or righteous anti-capitalist anger. Another explanation leftists point to is a history of Western colonialism in the Middle East. Well, yes, the Middle East was colonized by Europeans for a period of about 25 to 30 years between the 2 world wars. Yes, only 25 to 30 years. Most of the Arab regions were divided between the UK and France during those years. So what came before that? Were the Arabs living peacefully in well-organized states, prospering and flourishing before the evil white man came to rape their land? No. They were ruled by the Turkish-dominated Ottoman Empire for almost 500 years. Let me remind our ill-informed liberal viewers that Turks are not Arabs. So Arabs were ruled by a foreign Turkish Muslim empire from hundreds of miles away in Istanbul for the preceding 500 years. In World War I, the Ottoman Empire unwisely sided with Germany and Austria, and when they were defeated, the Western Allies seized their Arab possessions. After the conclusion of World War II, less than 30 years later, these Western powers left the Middle East voluntarily and gave the Muslim Arabs self-rule for the first time in modern history. So let's apply some common sense. Do you think the Arabs have more of a right to want revenge on the Western colonizers, who stayed for a few decades and peacefully granted them autonomy shortly thereafter? Or the Turkish Muslim colonizers who owned them for 5 centuries, never giving them autonomous control, never granting them states, and never recognizing the Arabs as a separate people worthy of their own homeland? And so, the colonialism excuse, like the poverty excuse, is at best an oversimplification and a distortion, and at worst an outright lie. The reason that Islam is aggressive against the infidels is that they are ordered to be so by the Quran. The world is divided into Dar al-Islam, the domain of Islam, and Dar al-Harb, the domain of war. In other words, any areas not yet conquered by Islam are considered ripe for conquest, and any and all means of violence and coercion are allowed to win these lands in the name of Islam. The Muslims have been in jihad mode since Muhammad slaughtered his own tribe of the Quraysh in the Arabian desert nearly 1400 years ago because they wouldn't convert to Islam. The bloodbath has only stopped when Islam lacked the power to attack openly. For example, that era after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the last great Muslim empire which claimed the title of Caliphate. Then we had a gap of 80 or so years when Islam was too weak and divided to strike out. In recent years, with the fall of the Soviet Union and the weakness of the decadent, self-hating West, Islam saw an opening to resume the eternal struggle. This is the source of the violence we see today. The truth is plain.